Great. Awesome. Good evening. Welcome. I'm Matt Vinacker. I have the honor of serving as the director of the state of Michigan's Save the Flags project, and I appreciate you all coming out tonight. You know, the 35-year success of our project to save and conserve 240 incredible battle flags carried by our Michigan soldiers has always had support from the grassroots, and the sole reason it's been successful is because of its grassroots support. Thousands, literally thousands of individuals who've given of their time and their talent and their treasure, including many of you here tonight, who have supported our project by researching or by actually donating funds to help us preserve this collection. And I'm going to veer off my scheduled program just a little bit for a few minutes at the start of this because I sort of twisted the arms of a couple who have recently supported the project through an adoption of a battle flag. And I convinced them to let me, at the start of this program, present them with a special tribute that I've prepared to honor them. I'd like to read and eventually present this tribute to Ed and Linda Carmen. To Ed and Linda Carmen, let it be known, it is a privilege and an honor to pay tribute to Ed and Linda Carmen on their adoption of a Civil War battle flag from the Michigan Capitol Battle Flag Collection. As part of Save the Flags, they have very generously donated $1,000 to adopt a flag carried by the 14th Michigan Volunteer Infantry Regiment in the Civil War. The flag being adopted is part of the Michigan Capitol Battle Flag Collection, numbering 240 banners, including flags carried for the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I. As part of Save the Flags, a project to preserve the state's collection of historic battle flags, groups or individuals may adopt a flag by contributing to its preservation. Ed and Linda Carmen are contributing not only to the preservation of this flag, but to the preservation of the entire collection. They are helping to preserve not only the banners themselves, but also the memory of the men who fought so courageously beneath them. The 14th Michigan Volunteer Infantry Regiment was mustered into service in February of 1862 at Ypsilanti, Michigan, with companies forming in Grand Rapids, Owasso, Corunna, and communities around Detroit. Company D, the Jeffries Rangers, formed here in Lansing under the command of Captain James Jeffries and included First Sergeant Joseph W. Myers of Delta Township, an ascribed Carmen relative. Sent to fight primarily in Tennessee and Georgia, the regiment suffered greatly from the unaccustomed climate and harsh conditions in which they were forced to camp, march, and fight. Of the 247 losses suffered, 195 men died from disease. They were eventually pressed into duty as mounted infantry, and after having been returned to infantry status in the fall of 1864, they marched to the sea in Savannah, Georgia, with Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, and through South and North Carolina, while constantly skirmishing with the enemy. Their final battle took place March 19th through the 21st, 1865, at Bentonville, North Carolina, while counterattacking a Confederate force, resulting in hand-to-hand combat. At the close of the war, they were sent to Louisville, Kentucky, where they were mustered out and disbanded on July 29, 1865. First Sergeant Joseph W. Myers enlisted on November 10, 1861, with the 14th Michigan Infantry at the age of 23 and would see continuous service throughout the entire Civil War. He was commissioned second lieutenant in 1862 and first lieutenant in 1863, and would be mustered out on July 18, 1865 as the acting Assistant Inspector General, 14th Army Corps. Post-war, he married, raised his family of 5 children near Cleveland, Ohio, and passed away in 1923. While emptying out a family home in Carleton, Michigan, the Carmens found a Civil War Casey's Infantry Tactics Officer's Manual with the inside cover signature of none other than Lieutenant J.W. Myers, 14th Michigan Infantry. They have very graciously donated the manual to Save the Flags where it will serve as an important primary resource. Ed and Linda Carmen are both lifelong Michiganders, and their family roots in Michigan go back to the early 1800s, before and shortly after statehood. Numerous Carmen ancestors were intimately involved in the Michigan auto industry, and Ed and Linda share a passion for preserving and interpreting state history. They volunteered at numerous museums and historical sites, including the Michigan Supreme Court Learning Center here at the state capitol, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, the Icebreaker Mackinac, and the R.E. Olds Transportation Museum. According to the Carmens, quote, history that is forgotten is lost, end quote. In special tribute, therefore, this document is signed and dedicated to honor Ed and Linda Carmen on their adoption of a banner carried by the 14th Michigan Volunteer Infantry Regiment. With this adoption, they are not only assisting in the preservation of this truly important artifact, but are also ensuring that the men of the 14th Michigan Volunteer Infantry and Lieutenant Joseph W. Myers will not be forgotten. This is signed by the Honorable Garland Gilchrist II, Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Michigan, and the Honorable Gretchen Whitmer, Governor of the great state of Michigan, the 103rd Legislature at Lansing, April 21st, 2025. Ed and Linda, if you would come up and receive this, I would appreciate it. Could I get one of you? Oh, you're going to take a picture. Thanks, Jacob. Don't go away. I have a couple other things. This is a photograph of the flag that Ed and Linda have adopted. Beautiful regimental. You get that, my friend. And I actually did a little poster up for you, a picture of Lieutenant Myers, the book that they donated, including Myers' inscription, and then two of the battle flags of the 14th.
Wow,
So,
thank you.
thank you.
Very kind of you.
Yeah, I appreciate your support.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. So it is appropriate that we meet here tonight to honor the sacrifices made by soldiers on a famous battlefield, as our country this week commemorates the 250th anniversary of the action of Minutemen and militiamen on the green at Concord and Lexington, and at the Battle Road that the British took on their retreat to Boston, marking the opening shots of the American Revolution. Some 77 years later, boys from Michigan were fighting on the fields in the common greens of Gettysburg, their sacrifice helping to determine, quote, whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Again, I want to thank you all for your attendance here tonight. And in full disclosure, I do need to preface this by saying that this is a reprisal of a talk I gave last summer on July 7th for the first time, actually at Gettysburg. So if you enjoy watching reruns on MeTV, you're in the right place tonight. Parts of this talk, too, are kind of an introduction to the Save the Flags project. And I know many of you have heard me talk about this ad nauseum in the past. So put up with the introduction and the rehash of the project. And hopefully the new information on Gettysburg will make it worth your while. So I mentioned I had the opportunity to speak at Gettysburg last year. I was honored and deeply humbled to be invited by the foundation to present at their Sacred Trust Talks. Their talks are held every year at the battlefield, very close to the anniversary of the three-day fight at Gettysburg. And the foundation every year invites well-respected Civil War historians and authors from across the nation to speak, and on occasion, they invite less respected and far less well-known ne'er-do-well folks like myself to present on topics related to the three-day battle that literally changed the course of history. My family's heard me talk about this, and many of you have, but to speak on that hallowed ground where so many Michigan men did their fighting and their dying, was the pinnacle, the top of my 30-year career in caring for these precious battle flags. That being said, I do need to preface my remarks with this also. I am by no stretch of the imagination a Civil War historian or expert or an expert on the battle at Gettysburg. I will always gratefully lead that responsibility to the real experts at Gettysburg and the real historians. I will say, though, in my more modest moments, I do like to fancy myself as someone that knows a thing or two about the Michigan battle flags that saw action there. So if you'll forgive the expression for this talk, I'll be dancing only with the one who brung me. And I'll be speaking of the battle flags and sharing some stories of the brave boys who fought and fell beneath them. The 1860 census of the state of Michigan reported her population to be approximately 750,000 souls. 5 years later, by the spring of 1865, the old peninsular state had sent over 90,000 of her father's sons and brothers to the horrific battlefields of the Civil War. This constituted a contribution based on a per capita basis that was larger than any other northern state's contribution. This also meant that well over half, 50% of our eligible male population fought in the Civil War. Hard to imagine or to support or to fathom an equal contribution by the standards of modern warfare. Answering the call were 30 regiments of infantry, 11 regiments of cavalry, a regiment each of engineers and mechanics, sharpshooters, the 1st Michigan Colored Infantry, 14 light artillery batteries, and many, many more men who fought with regiments from neighboring states, fought in the naval service of the federal government, fought with U.S. Units, including Berdan's U.S. sharpshooters, 2 companies of which formed right here in my hometown of Lansing and saw action at Gettysburg. Over 4,000 of these men fought among the rocky hills, fields, and orchards of Gettysburg. Some of those men finding their final resting place in Pennsylvania graves. I had the great fortune of being born and raised here in Michigan's capital city, quite literally in the long morning shadow of this beautiful building that we're in tonight. And one of my earliest childhood memories was of visiting the Capitol with my family. I came with my older brother's Cub Scout group. I remember us standing in the central rotunda, surrounded by the smoke-begrimed, battle-scarred, bullet-torn, and yes, blood-stained flags that our noble Michigan volunteers bore into, fought, bled, and died beneath on the battlefields of the great American Civil War. I'm quite certain that in those tender years, I did not, nor could I have possibly fully comprehended the magnitude, the level of service and sacrifice that those torn banners represented. Even so, I found the experience to be humbling, remarkable, and very, very memorable. I was 4 years old. Never did I imagine then that I would spend the bulk of my career having been charged with the awesome responsibility of caring for those priceless treasures. I delivered this talk at Gettysburg on my 58th birthday, and it was one of the better birthdays I had to be there on that field on my birthday, 54 years after first seeing the battle flags here in the Capitol. This is a responsibility, an honor of caring for these flags that I do not shirk, nor one that I take lightly. For you see, these flags have become a very important part of who I am as an individual, of who I am as a proud citizen of the great state of Michigan, and an essential part of who I am as an American. These flags have a way, their way, of deeply affecting a person. Many of you have had the opportunity to view the flags in our collection, and I think you'll attest to this also. To gaze upon the battle honors lovingly inscribed, the blurred and shrunken stars, the stitches of the soldiers' own desperate attempts at battlefield repairs. the shattered staffs, the frayed fringe, the still pungent odor of centuries-old spent powder. The silk, crimson stain, has a powerful effect upon a person. These flags have become to me as dear old friends, ragged, worn, aged, tired, so very, very tired, but desirous still of the opportunity to tell their stories, desirous still in their own infirmity to have someone, to have anyone listen. But alas, sadly, these flags do not, nay, they cannot speak in audible tones, but their stories of undaunted courage and unimaginable bravery are manifested by their rent folds and in their silken fields of glory. To a soldier, a good soldier, the colors of his regiment are a priceless treasure. For their honor, he will submit willingly to any sacrifice, and a stain cast upon them is a stigma upon his own character. In the hour of peril, he will rally round them, heedless of the din of battle, and he considers his life of no value in their defense. He considers his life of no value in their defense. We just don't talk like that nowadays. Frederick Curtenius, Colonel, 6th Michigan Infantry Regiment. These colors stand today as a constant reminder of the 90,000 Michigan men who fought in that war, the 15,000 Michigan boys who did not return, boys whose bodies were laid in their blood-soaked uniforms in shallow, hastily dug graves across the battlefields of this great nation, boys who left their homes and their hearth fires here in Michigan and fought in 4 long, horrific years of combat. And those boys who were fortunate enough to return to those home fires, God sparing their lives, came back. They came back changed men. Men who I have absolutely no doubt spent many a sleepless night, perpetually burdened and consumed, burdened by the guilt of the blood they'd been forced to spill, burdened by the guilt of Cain for having slain his own brother, burdened by the guilt of their mere and yet their most audacious act of survival, while so many of the comrades of their youth perished round and about them in the struggle. These were men, however, who were also determined that what they had seen and that what they had done should actually mean something, that it should not be wasted and frittered away, that it should go towards building a state and a new and a free nation that was truly worthy of their sacrifice, a state and a new nation that was truly worthy of their service, a state and a new nation that by God was truly worthy of the buckets of blood that had been spilled. They were also determined that they should be remembered. This was not some boastful or vainglorious attempt at immortality, but with the desire, the hope, and the fervent prayer that the uselessness, the madness, the horrible, utter brutality that is all war would never, ever again be visited upon this nation, upon their progeny, their children, or their children's children. And so they came back to the haunted fields of their youths. They came back to Gettysburg on June 12th, 1889, to dedicate their monuments. They returned their flags to the care of the state of Michigan in a ceremony in 1866, and the state promised to care for them in perpetuity, lest we forget their sacrifice. 24th Michigan formed in Wayne County in the summer of 1862 under the direction of Colonel Henry A. Morrow. 33 Morrow, who was born and raised in Warrenton, Virginia, moved to Michigan as a young man. He was a veteran of the Mexican-American War, and by 1862 was a judge in the Wayne County Recorder's Court. He was beloved by his men and considered one of Michigan's finest Civil War officers. Among his regiment were Henry Ford's uncles, John and Barney Littagott. Henry Ford, by the way, was born in late July of 1863, just a few days literally after the battle raged at Gettysburg. Another early enlistee in Morrow's 24th was a widower farmer from Nankin Township in Wayne County. Abel Peck was a 42-year-old widower who had outlived two wives when he joined the regiment and left his daughters Alice and Ella in the care of relatives and friends. Abel wrote incredibly moving letters home to his oldest daughter, Alice, which thankfully survive in the archives of my alma mater, Michigan State University. As is often the case with my own text messages to my wife and to my children, they can attest to this. Abel usually failed to capitalize the beginning of new sentences and omitted punctuation. Punctuation is so overrated, which makes reading the letters and my texts, according to my children, a bit more challenging and a whole lot of fun. In his very first letter, Abel asks his daughter to please excuse his poor spelling and penmanship. Each letter was almost always lovingly addressed, "My dear child," with child spelt with an E at the end, and signed with fondest regard, your father Abel. In his first letter, dated August 14th, 1862, Peck informs his daughter that he is enlisted in Morrow's 24th and that his company, according to the inspecting general, is among the best in the regiment, proudly stating that they, quote, are most smart boys, except two or three of them. Didn't specify which two or three. O.B. Curtis, writing in 1891 in his History of the 24th Michigan of the Iron Brigade, tells us that the regiment's battle flag was presented on August 26, 1862 at 5 p.m. as it assembled on the Campus Martius in Detroit. David Harborough presented the flag with these words, quote, Colonel Morrow, the county of Wayne has given to you her truest and noblest sons. Your regiment has been sooner raised than any other that has left the state. F. Buell and Company requests me to present through you to the regiment this beautiful banner. It is the gift of generous, loyal men and patriotic soldiers. It is the flag of our country, and it symbolizes the Union, its power, grandeur, and glory. In the smoke and din of battle, may its stars and stripes ever be seen moving onward and onward till victory shall be won and bring peace to our now bleeding and distracted but still united country. Colonel Morrow, in accepting the flag on behalf of the regiment, promised that it would never trail before the enemy or fall into enemy hands. Quote, if my regiment fall, it shall be with honor. It was a pledge the regiment would more than honor. The national flag that you see here, with its gold bullion fringe and beautifully embroidered stars and regimental designation, was then delivered to Color Sergeant Abel Peck, who would be its caretaker. On August 29th, the 24th left Michigan for the front and for war. After spending a month in forts near Washington, the regiment marched to Sharpsburg, Maryland, and joined the legendary Iron Brigade. The brigade, made up of Wisconsin and Indiana regiments, had already suffered terribly, particularly at Bronner's Farm, South Mountain, and Antietam, where they earned their nickname from their iron resolve and steadiness. In November, Abel Peck wrote again to his daughter Alice from Virginia, Dear child, I have a little time to spare and cannot spend it more pleasantly than trying to write to you. Yesterday, we started with a fair prospect of a fight, but halted after marching 10 miles. This morning, the colonel called us together and talked to us, said he thought we should have to fight today or tomorrow, but we can't tell. If we have to fight, I expect to take my part, and if I fall, you must not mourn, for I think that the honor of having a father die in the defense of his country will make up for the loss you sustain. Dear one, goodbye. The men of the 24th had received a fairly cold reception from the other soldiers in the Iron Brigade. It appears that some of the veterans of the brigade resented the brand new regiment from Michigan, whose 900 men wearing regulation caps equaled in number the other four regiments that were left in the brigade. The hard-bitten warriors of the brigade held themselves aloof. In December of 1862, during the Battle of Fredericksburg, the 24th performed like seasoned soldiers, taking casualties, including Henry Ford's Uncle John, who was killed, and thereby also winning the respect of their comrades. The Michigan men also won the right to wear the brigade's famous badge of courage, the black Hardy hat. They too would now be known, along with the rest of the men of the brigade, as those damn black hats. In mid-June of 1863, Abel Peck wrote Alice again, "My dear child, I embrace this opportunity to say to you that I am well. It is very warm and dry. Where we are going is unknown to us, but I suppose the Rebs are trying to get into Pennsylvania or Maryland. I must close, for the mail is to go very soon, and we may start at any time. I will try and write you soon. Love to all, from your father in haste." 13 days later, on July 1st, 1863, Abel G. Peck was carrying the flag of the 24th when they approached the crossroads town of Gettysburg. While fighting at McPherson's Ridge in the Herbst Woods, Peck would be the first man of the regiment killed. There are many accounts of the 24th Michigan at Gettysburg, but here I will quote from Colonel Morrow's after-action report and regimental historian O.B. Curtis. Quote, "The noble and stalwart Color Sergeant Abel Peck, in whose keeping the colors were placed on the campus martius, yielded up his life in their defense early in the morning fight, being the first man of the regiment killed in this battle. Before they touched the ground, as Peck fell, Color Corporal Charles Belore of Company E sprang forward and, seizing the colors, bore them aloft as the troops advanced to the capture of Archer's brigade. Belore, too, was killed in McPherson's Woods near the second line of battle. Private August Ernst of K now took the colors from the ground and carried them until the third line of battle was formed, when he too shared the fate of his comrades. When Ernst dropped dead, the flag fell with him at the feet of First Sergeant Everett B. Welton of Company H, who reached forward and picked it up, holding it until Colonel Morrow ran to him and took the thrice prostrated flag from his hands. He gave it to Color Corporal Andrew Wagner of F, who boldly waved it in the face of the advancing foe, and under a terrific fire took a new position indicated to him by Colonel Morrow. Wagner, in turn, the last of the color guard, was shot and fell with the colors. Colonel Morrow took them from under Wagner and bore them himself until Private William Kelly of Company E came up and took them, saying, quote, "The colonel of the 24th Michigan shall not carry the colors while I am alive." In an instant after, his lifeless body lay at the feet of the colonel. After the death of the brave Kelly, the flag was carried for a time by Private Lilburn Spalding of Company K. When Colonel Morrow again took it and made another effort to rally his more than thrice decimated ranks, he carried it aloft until he too was wounded near the seminary. Somewhere between the first line of battle at McPherson's Woods and the rail fence barricade near the seminary, Corporal William Ziegler of A was instantly killed. Sergeant William Nagel of A, Corporal Thomas Suggett of G, and Private Thomas Ballou of C were all mortally wounded, each while acting as the color guard. Soon after assuming command after Morrow's wounding, Captain A.M. Edwards saw the flag lying on the ground in the hand of a dead or dying soldier boy who was reclining on his right side. Captain Edwards took the flag from the young soldier's hands, which were grasping it with a death-like grip, and after rallying the men to it amid a shower of bullets, bore it through the town to the cemetery, where he collapsed on a tombstone as the remnants of the regiment rallied around the bullet-riddled folds of the flag. A few instances of such devotion to the flag can be found in the history of any war. During the first day's fight, the flag of the 24th Michigan was borne by no less than 10 different persons, 5 of whom were killed instantly and 4 others mortally wounded. At Gettysburg, the Iron Brigade lost 1,153 men. Of the 496 men of the 24th who entered the fight in the morning, 399 were killed, wounded, or missing by nightfall. With almost 80% casualties, 24th Michigan suffered among the highest losses of any of the 400 Union regiments who fought at Gettysburg. The conduct of the 24th on this first day's battle, from colonel to private, was a series of heroic and brilliant acts of supporting and rallying on the flag amid showers of lead and hail. When its flag was presented to the regiment in Detroit, a solemn vow was taken never to allow it to trail before the enemy or fall into his hands. The flag, shot through by 23 bullets, its staff splintered, spoke more forcibly than words that the 24th had kept its vow. The flag, which was almost new before Gettysburg, after Gettysburg, it was so tattered and torn that it was retired from active service. A little more than 1 month later, it was in the care of its donors in Detroit, and another procured to replace it. The Lieutenant Colonel Mark Flanagan of the 24th lost his leg at Gettysburg. 1 month later, he's in the city of Detroit on a speaker's platform trying to convince men to join his decimated regiment. Not exactly a great PR move. With the battle flag that they carried at Gettysburg. The 24th Michigan's flag, all of the flags in our collection are incredible, but the 24th, I think, can be argued is probably the most famous and the best well-known flag in our collection. And honestly, I think that's how I wrangled an invite to speak at Gettysburg was due to the fact that the 24th flag exists in our collection. Some flags, such as the 24th Michigan Gettysburg flag, are very well documented and their provenance is unquestioned. They've left a marked paper trail of their use through newspaper articles, diaries, descriptions, and in even rare occasions, actual photographs of the flags. Other flags in our collection, sadly, lack that important primary source trail. Last spring, I received an email from Ranger Dan Welch at Gettysburg requesting information and possibly an image of the flag that the 16th Michigan Regiment carried in its courageous defense of Little Round Top. Sadly, I had to share with Ranger Welch that we cannot say for certain that one of the four flags of the 16th in our collection is definitively the flag the regiment fought beneath on July 2nd, 1863. I thought that perhaps maybe a description of how we have come to that conclusion might be valuable and also might shed some light on the work that we do as a crew here in both preserving these flags, but also in attempting to document their history, basically when and where they were carried. Sometimes this work is conducted simply by the process of elimination. SC-60, which you see on the frame in front of you, although an incredibly beautiful flag, was carried and most probably commissioned at the end of the war, as indicated by the almost complete set of battle honors. You'll note all the battle honors done in one artist's hand, including the honor for Lee's surrender at Appomattox. An article from the New York Tribune in June of 1865 states that several regiments were having their flags inscribed, read painted, in the city, including the 16th Michigan. SC-60 is a 35-star regimental, indicating it was commissioned post-Gettysburg and post-West Virginia's entry into the Union, which added a 35th star to the flags. It also indicates on the bottom banner their veteran status. This regiment had served for 3 years, and a majority of the regiment having agreed to re-enlist, they achieved veteran status, and you can see that on the red banner, 16th Michigan Veteran Volunteer Infantry. You will note, though, that one of the battle honors is the battle honor for Gettysburg. SC-61 is a fragmentary national, and even though half of the canton is gone, it bears evidence, too, that it was a 35-star flag, following the Philadelphia Depot pattern of 10 stars in the center oval, 20 in the outer oval, 1 star at each corner, and 1 in the dead center. So this, too, would exclude it being a 35-star flag from consideration of having been at Gettysburg. SC-77 is a very fragmentary flag. Most of what you see in the image is actually netting that was added in an awkward and admittedly horrible and damaging attempt at conservation in the 1960s. We were in the very slow process of conserving all the 1960s netted flags and removing that netting. Only one star is visible in the canton. This flag is a leather tag that was attached to it, and I got super excited when I saw the leather tag, but all it says is 16th Michigan. I was hoping it would list which battles it had been at, which we do have some flags in the collection that have leather tags that say that, but sadly this one not. The one star that remains is painted in gold. Now, if we are to give appropriate credence to the comments made by Colonel Edward Hill in 1889 at the monument dedication to the 16th, he stated, quote, "When the brave sergeant lifted them up, their latest guardian with his lifeblood ebbing fast, he prayed to die beneath their silvery stars." We take Hill at his word, this gold star flag would preclude it also from being the Gettysburg flag. SC-78, sadly, is a similar story, a very fragmentary national, mostly visible as the 1960s net with bits of silk and bottom fringe, no intact stars or even fragment of stars. SC-78 could, however, be the Gettysburg flag, but the evidence, sadly, is too circumstantial. A little bit about the regiment. Lieutenant Colonel Norval E. Welch procured a national flag from Army stores in April of 1863. In his words, it was a gift of the War Department. He received this flag just prior to the regiment's service at Chancellorsville and at Gettysburg. Welch was a 26-year-old University of Michigan Law School graduate when he enlisted in 1861. I could hardly tie my shoes at 26. The age of these men just boggles the mind. By July of 1863, he was leading the regiment as its colonel. In presenting the flag to the regiment, Welch, about who the Detroit Free Press stated, quote, "A braver man and a truer patriot Michigan cannot boast of," he spoke of the importance of the banner. Welch said, "Upon it the stripes are as ever. In its blue field not a star is blotted out." This gets me. "It is for the preservation of this holy thing that we have sacrificed ease and pleasure, and for which we have and are again willing to imperil our lives, for the preservation of this holy thing." At Little Round Top, the 16th was exposed on their right flank. With little time to position themselves, they were ferociously attacked. The fighting seemed centered on the color guard. Around the flag, the casualties were horrific, and purportedly every man of the color guard save one was killed. Captain Hill remembered that, quote, "the colors, as in if pitying sympathy with their brave defenders, fell shot from the staff, enveloping the fallen in their silken folds like a funeral pall, a funeral garment." Withstanding two spirited attacks, despite being outnumbered, a major misunderstanding took place at the third attack. Somehow the colors, possibly in the hands of inexperienced men, along with 3 right companies of the regiment and their commanding officer, became separated or very purposely withdrew from the body of the regiment in the main line of combat. The rest of the regiment noted that Welch, during the hottest part of the battle, had left with the colors for some reason. No one knows to this day exactly what happened. Some credited cowardice, others confusion. Disaster would have struck if the 140th New York hadn't arrived to assist the remaining members of the 16th in plugging the hole. Because of the Union victory at Gettysburg, the matter was allowed to drop. However, Welch felt the stigma keenly. Colonel Byron Cutchin of the 20th Michigan Infantry was a friend to Colonel Welch. They were classmates at U of M, class of 1861. Cutchin spoke of their relationship at a Memorial Day event, a Decoration Day event in 1899. Cutchin stated that the evening before the Battle of Peebles Farm during the siege of Petersburg, well over a year after Gettysburg, he met with his friend Colonel Welch in his tent. Upon his departure and after Cutchin had mounted his horse, he grasped his friend's hand in a farewell gesture. Welch said to him, quote, "Colonel, the next fight I get into, I'm going for a star or 6 feet of ground." The next day, September 30th, 1864, Welch led an attack on an earthen fort. The first to mount the ramparts, he called out, "Follow me," and raised his sword. A rebel bullet pierced his brain, and he fell dead. The men took the works, and the colors of half a dozen regiments were floating triumphantly where a few minutes before rebel colors had flaunted their traitorous folds to the breeze. Colonel Cutchin witnessed the detail, carrying his classmate and fellow colonel's body off the field. When his body was returned to Ann Arbor in his 6 feet of ground, Welch's funeral was the largest the city had ever seen. Only then was it revealed that Colonel Norvell Welch's enlistment had expired a week before his suicidal charge. Is it our place, from the comfort and the safety of armchairs and the distance of 160 years, to pass judgment upon and question the bravery of such men? Michigan's 1st Regiment of Infantry, formed in April of 1861 as a 3-month regiment, and saw action at the First Battle of Bull Run. Prior to the return to the state, the organization of the 1st Michigan Infantry 3 Years Regiment commenced, and the core of the 3 Years Regiment was composed of men and officers of the original 3 Months Regiment. The regiment saw extensive action in the battles of the Peninsula Campaign in the spring and summer of 1862. At the Second Battle of Bull Run, they lost 8 officers and took 50% casualties, including their original Colonel Horace Roberts, who was killed and buried on the field. They saw action in the Maryland Campaign and at Fredericksburg, and arrived on the field at Gettysburg very early on the morning of the second day. Around 4:30 that afternoon, under the command of Colonel Ira C. Abbott, the regiment was engaged near the wheat field on the Stony Hill, positioned between the 22nd Massachusetts and the 118th Pennsylvania regiments. Abbott was a 38-year-old postmaster from Burr Oak, Michigan, and served first as a captain in the 3 Months Regiment, and then advanced in rank to colonel of the 3 Years Regiment. He was wounded twice at Fredericksburg and led his men into combat on July 2nd, 1863, as a well-seasoned veteran. From Lieutenant Colonel William A. Throop's report of the action, he said, quote, "We got into position in line about 4:30 p.m. We had no sooner got our line fully established than the enemy drove in our skirmishers and appeared in force on the edge of a wood on our front, within 200 yards of our line. Throop, who had taken command from Colonel Abbott, who was severely wounded early in the fight, a Confederate bullet shattering his teeth and nearly completely severing his upper lip. Throop continued in his report, quote, "We ordered our men to fix bayonets and commenced firing on the enemy with a deadly effect, driving him back after a severe fire of half an hour. He, however, soon returned and was a second time driven back with great loss. Our color bearer, Sergeant Patrick Connors, was the first man wounded. The colors were at once taken from the ground by Corporal John H. Harrington of Company A and gallantly borne through the battle. The first held the line until being relieved by a brigade of Pennsylvania reserves. Of the 125 men who fought that day on the Stony Hill with the 1st Michigan Volunteer Infantry Regiment, 44 were casualties, including 1 officer killed, 6 wounded, 4 enlisted men killed, 25 wounded, and 8 missing. Color Sergeant Connors would survive his wounding and would leave the regiment at the expiration of his 3-year enlistment in the fall of 1864. Corporal Harrington would be wounded again at the Wilderness, but muster out with the regiment as a captain. Lieutenant Colonel Throop would be permanently promoted to command of the regiment, breveted brigadier general, and post-war served in our capital as Michigan's quartermaster general. The fight at the Stony Hill would be Colonel Abbott's last. Although he recovered from the wound, ill health kept him from the field. He would serve in D.C. on the court-martial board and would end the war as a brevet brigadier general. And then post-war, he would serve in the Pension Bureau until his death in 1908. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Working with this project has afforded me many unique opportunities in meeting interesting individuals, present company included. In December of 23, I hosted a small group tour of our archival flag storage space at the State Museum, as I have for many of you. As I pulled out the flags of the first, one of the gentlemen, Kurt, asked if it might be possible for him to go out to the parking lot to his car to retrieve an artifact that was associated with the flags we were viewing. Kurt came back in with the engraved, personalized revolver carried by Colonel Ira Abbott at the Stony Hill at Gettysburg. This photograph does not betray my trembling hands. What a thrill and experience that was. I shouldn't spend the time telling this story because I'm going to run out of time, but it's a great story. So Kurt knew the guy that owned the revolver, kind of stalked him a little bit and said, "Hey, if you ever decide to sell this, please give me right of first refusal because I really would like to own this." So the guy contacted him, this was years ago, and said, "I'm going to sell the revolver," set the price for it, which I've forgotten. Kurt didn't have the money, so he went to the bank, the local bank, to get a loan to buy the revolver. And the branch manager said, "What do you need the loan for?" And he explained it to him. And he said, "I'm going to give you the loan under one condition." He says, "You need to bring that revolver in so I can see it." So he got the loan to buy this revolver. And Kurt was very gracious in letting me share that image and that story with you. So the 4th Michigan Volunteer Infantry Regiment fought not far from the Stony Hill and was fighting for its very survival in the nearby wheat field. On the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, after an exhausting march, the 4th arrived at Gettysburg. Several hours after its arrival, they were engaged. The fighting was chaotic and desperate, as the 4th was nearly surrounded. Those men who were not killed outright or captured were caught in deadly hand-to-hand combat in their attempt to cut their way out of the firestorm. Some of the most brutal fighting took place, go figure, around the colors. Henry Sage, a member of the regiment, gave an account of the action in a letter written in 1884. He stated that the color bearer that day was Corporal Thomas Tarnsney. It is reported that our color bearer, Tarnsney, either surrendered or threw down the colors and ran. Sage continued, "Colonel Jeffords, seeing our colors close by in the possession of the Rebs, called on my brother, Richard Watson Sage. His father also fought with the regiment. He was a chaplain of the regiment. Three boys from this men from the same family. Called on my brother, Richard Watson Sage, to rescue the colors. Jeffords was a lawyer from Dexter, Michigan, and had advanced in rank from a lieutenant of the Dexter Union Guard, their flag you see here in the frame, to eventually rising to colonel. An unidentified 4th Michigan officer whose account was published in Detroit stated that the colonel, quote, cut down 1 or 2 Rebs in a melee around the colors. Henry Sage also wrote of the outcome of the battle. In the fight, the colors were torn to shreds, what little remained. And in the act of fighting the way out, Colonel Jeffords was killed by bayonet thrust through the body. Jeffords was not killed, in fact, immediately, but mortally wounded, succumbing to his injury early the next morning on July 3rd. His last words, "Mother, mother, mother." In addition to Jeffords, several other members of the color company were killed or wounded during the intense fighting in and near the wheat field. Corporal Charles Phelps was killed. Color Guard member William H. Plummer was wounded in the leg, and Sergeant Edward Tripp was wounded by 5 rebel bullets and died shortly after. So, what of the fate of the flag that so many of these men fought and died for? Quartermaster Robert Campbell and Henry Sage agree it was torn to pieces and lost on the field of combat. Campbell said that, quote, our flag was lost, said to have been torn to pieces in the general melee. The unnamed officer of the Detroit Free Press agreed. It was found that we had lost the United States colors drawn from the government last winter. Today, two fragmentary national flags, SC-11 and SC-12, that you see here of the 4th survive in the Capitol Battle Flag collection. While some would like to believe, including myself, to be honest with you, that one of the other may in fact be the Jeffords flag, almost all the firsthand accounts of the action around the colors make this seem impossible, or at least implausible. Still, they crowded forward, bound upon victory, until we came face to face and bayonets were used. And right here, I will tell you that this is the only time in all of my service that I was in a real hand-to-hand, free-for-all mix-up. Frederick Osterly, describing the action of the 7th Michigan at the Battle of Gettysburg, repulsing Pickett's charge. This is the only flag of the 7th in our collection. Mustered into service in Monroe on the 22nd of August, 1861, the regiment received its first stand of colors after it left Michigan. They fought in some of the fiercest battles of the war. At Gettysburg, the regiment entered the battle on July 2nd after a grueling 3-day march of 75 miles. Imagine marching 75 miles and then being thrown into combat after that march. They were immediately sent to the front. They held their position at Cemetery Ridge and at the Bloody Angle. The following day, against the withering fire of Pickett's charge, twice their dear old battle flag was seized and twice retaken in hand-to-hand fighting. Although exhausted by the march and forced to fight without food or their colonel, Amos Steele, who had been killed early in the battle, the 7th fought on, captured a flag of the 7th North Carolina Infantry. They went into the fight with 14 officers and 151 men, 21 of whom were killed and 44 wounded. I want to just speak to that real quickly. A full infantry regiment during the Civil War was supposed to be 1,000 men. By Gettysburg, halfway into the Civil War, use this as an example, the 7th Michigan was down to 151 men out of the original 1,000 that had enlisted when the war first started. That's the kind of attrition that these regiments saw after having fought all those years. On September 28, 1861, at Camp Lyon near Detroit, the 1st Michigan Cavalry Regiment received a heavily fringed blue silk flag, a standard with the federal coat of arms. It was accepted by Colonel Thornton Broadhead, who would be mortally wounded commanding his regiment on August 30th, 1862 at the Second Battle of Bull Run. In June of 63, they were assigned to a brand new brigade of cavalry made up of 4 Michigan regiments. My understanding, it was the only brigade in the Union Army that was composed entirely of men from one state. The 1st, 5th, 6th, and 7th Michigan Cavalry Regiments. The brigade would be commanded by someone I'm sure most of you have heard of, 23-year-old General George Armstrong Custer of Monroe, Michigan. Perhaps one of the regiment's greatest moments was at Gettysburg on July 3rd of 63 in the East Cavalry Field. 1st Michigan was ordered to charge the rebel cavalry led by Jeb Stuart. As they formed, Custer rode up, and drawing his saber, he pointed it at the enemy, and exhorting his men to action, shouted, "Come on, you Wolverines." This charge has been described as one of the most desperate as well as brilliant charges of the war, according to Custer. It's a lot like Custer. Successfully checking the advance of General Stuart, and in Custer's own words, this is a direct quote, "I challenge the annals of warfare to produce a more brilliant or more successful charge of cavalry." The 5th Michigan Cavalry was raised in Detroit area and mustered in on August 30th, 1862. Their Colonel Russell Alger would become a future governor of Michigan, a U.S. Senator, and Secretary of War during the Spanish-American War. The regiment was also engaged along with the brigade at the East Cavalry Field, where they repulsed a Confederate attack near the Rummel Farm while dismounted. 3 weeks after Gettysburg, July 24, 1863, Captain Smith Hastings of the 5th Cav, a daring young 19-year-old officer from Coldwater, Michigan, defied his superior officer's direct order to abandon their battery's guns during a retreat at Newby's Crossroads, Virginia. Dismounting and with the help of the men under his command, Smith Hastings helped to slowly move the guns to safety, all the while under fire. His action saved the battery from capture. Hastings would be wounded at Trevilian Station, Virginia. He was promoted to major in August and then became colonel of the regiment in December of 1864. On August 2nd, 1897, over 30 years later, he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his action. This regimental standard, along with a swallowtail guidon, were found in Smith Hastings' personal effects many years after his death. In 1993, Save the Flags was able to privately raise the funds to purchase both of these flags. One day after, our 2 representatives have flown out to California to exchange the check for the flags. One day after, there was a huge earthquake in California, and the home that these 2 flags were housed in was completely demolished. One day after the transfer was made. Just a kind of incredible story. Organized at Grand Rapids and sent to the field in October of '62, the 6th Michigan Cavalry Regiment saw its first action under Custer's command near Hunterstown, Pennsylvania on July 2nd, where Custer led Company A of the regiment in a brash attack on a much larger force of Confederates. Custer made a lasting impression upon the entire brigade after ordering Company A to attack when he rode to their front and exclaimed, "I'll lead you this time, boys. Come on." Custer was unhorsed in the assault and came very close to losing his life. 32 men of Company A were killed, wounded, or captured. The following day, on July 3rd, the regiment saw action in supporting roles for the brigade in the East Cavalry Field. Over the duration of the war, they lost 7 officers and 95 men killed in action. 6 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, 2 brothers, William and James Van Scoten, 18 and 19 years old, from Sunfield, Michigan, enlisted with the 6th Michigan Cavalry Regiment. Young William was captured and died at the infamous prisoner of war camp at Andersonville, Georgia. James was wounded at the Battle of Winchester, Virginia in September, but survived his wounds. To he, I, and my family are eternally grateful, he being the great-great-grandfather of my wife, Mary Kathleen. The 7th was organized early in 1863, also in Grand Rapids. In the fight on July 3rd, the 5th Michigan Cavalry was severely pressed and in danger of being overrun. Suddenly, the 7th intervened. Quote, "Just then a column of mounted men was seen advancing from the right and rear of the Union line. Squadron succeeded squadron until an entire regiment came into view, with sabers gleaming and colors gaily fluttering in the breeze," recalled Captain James Kidd of the 6th. The 7th charged into the open field, forcing the Confederates to flee. The charge seemed irresistible until they topped a small rise and came up against a stone and rail fence, which stopped their advance. The fighting here was brutal. The 7th's Colonel William Mann stating that it was a desperate but unequal hand-to-hand conflict, the combatants so close as to powder burn the enemy with every firing of their weapons. After clearing a portion of the fence, the attacks continued, and after 3 charges, the regiment was forced to withdraw. There are 3 flags, and I am nearing the end, I promise. There are 3 flags in the state Capitol battle flag collection that were carried by the 3rd Michigan Infantry. The first, a beautifully hand-embroidered presentation flag that many of you have had the chance to see, was carried by the regiment from their enlistment in June of '61 until the flag was retired from active service and returned to their place of training in Grand Rapids, Michigan in March of '63. Presumably, the regiment then received these 2 flags as replacements, as they too were retired shortly after the 3rd Michigan was consolidated with the 5th Michigan in June of '64. So our assumption has always been that these flags would have been the flags that would have seen service at Gettysburg. From the after-action report of Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pierce, the 3rd arrived on the field of Gettysburg around noon on the 2nd of July, after starting their march from Emmetsburg at 3 a.m. that morning. They were then deployed as skirmishers to the left of the peach orchard, driving the enemy skirmishers. And upon gaining this position, we discovered that the enemy was massing his forces on our left. Our men fighting with a desperation never before witnessed, at times at a range of not over 50 yards. We held our position until about 7 p.m. when we retired in good order. It was at this time that our Colonel, Byron Pierce, was wounded and I assumed command. The Colonel and Lieutenant Colonel were in fact brothers. It was also around this time that Corporal Orrin Wade of the Color Guard was mortally wounded in defending the flag, a piece of shell cutting through his right shoulder blade and lodging in his lungs. In a letter to his brother, Corporal Charles Price wrote about Wade's mortal wounding and stated that Wade said, quote, "He would kill his mother. He seemed to worry more about his folks than he did himself." And that, quote, "he was willing to die if that was to be his fate, but he wanted me to write his folks." Last summer when we were at Gettysburg, I was able to find Wade's grave and paid my respects before I spoke of his mortal wounding the next day. On July 3rd, the regiment was in support of the center of the Union line in repulsing Pickett's charge, suffering no casualties. Organized in August of '61, the 5th Michigan Infantry mustered into service at Fort Wayne in Detroit. In receiving their presentation colors, Colonel Henry Terry said, "The lives of the whole regiment are all devoted to the defense of these colors. God grant it may never trail in the dust." At Gettysburg, the regiment was commanded by Colonel John Pulford, who received the 3rd of what would be 5 woundings in the course of the war. In the second day's fight in the woods west of the wheat field, Colonel Regis de Trobriand, commanding the brigade, described the action in an incident with the color bearer. Quote, "As I arrived near the colors, he, the color bearer, staggered and fell back several paces. I called out, 'Steady!' 'I am wounded,' he said with a choking voice. 'Where?' 'In the throat.' I leaned over my horse and put my hand on his shoulder. 'It's nothing,' I said. 'I see no blood.' He immediately retook his place and raising up the flag. The ball which had struck him in the neck had bounced off his leather collar, and the shock had choked him for a moment. The collar that de Trobriand was referring to was in fact the collar that was attached to the shoulder harness and the cup that was used to carry the battle flag. This is a very rare occurrence of the act of carrying a flag being the savior of a color bearer and not a death sentence. I suppose it could be argued, though, if he wasn't carrying the damn flag, he wouldn't have been shot at, probably. Anyway, in closing, the feelings of the men for their flags were well expressed by Lieutenant Henry Beach upon sending home a standard of the 1st Michigan Cavalry Regiment after the fight at Gettysburg. Quote, "Gentlemen, I have the honor to forward to you the tattered standard of our regiment. Where, when, and how well we have defended it, we will let the history of the war tell. It has flown over many a bloody field. It's been pierced by rifle and canister shot. Yet we trust that we have never forsaken or dishonored it. Sirs, we venerate, we almost worship it. In confiding it to your care, we humbly pray You will preserve it as long as the peninsular state has a name and a place in the nation. And whenever God's sparing our lives to return, any of us shall behold, we will bow to its familiar device while we weep for our brave comrades who have fallen beneath it. Does the passage of time, the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months, the years, the decades, or even the centuries diminish the soldier's hope? Does the physical distance from the great shores of Michigan to those battlefields afar diminish their fervent prayer that they, their service, their sacrifice, and their flags be remembered, cared for, and cherished? I would argue that it does not, that it must not. And so it is with that hope that I proceed today with this project to preserve for posterity the banners that were so important to them, the banners that were so often the focal point of combat, by caring enough to preserve these flags that meant so much to them, that they fought and died to protect, that they so often rallied upon. We are, in a larger way, working to preserve their memories, are we not? Perhaps by caring for their cherished flags and the hallowed grounds of battle where they fought, just perhaps we can ensure that their sacrifice is remembered and honored and cherished. Thank you so much for your attendance and your incredible kindness and patience with me. So a lot of information to get through. I apologize too for relying so heavily on my notes, but I knew I'd screw it up if I didn't. So I'd be very happy to answer any questions if you have them. But yes, Timothy. Yeah, the Henry Ford. Yep, of Henry Ford auto manufacturing fame. Yeah. In fact, a little bit of reading I've done about Henry Ford. He had some interesting ideas, shall we say. One of them is he believed in reincarnation. And he was born July 63 and supposedly believed that he was the reincarnation of his Uncle John, who'd been killed at Fredericksburg the December before his birth. I remember reading that and tucked it away in my memory at some point. So, yeah, interesting story. Yes, please.
I had read somewhere that the Michigan regiment that you referred to that was at Little Round Top,
Yeah.
that in the process of mustering and racing, to plug the gap there, that a large portion of the regiment was divided off and was sent to, I think, a stone wall that's on the other side of Little Round Top, and they were down there with the first sharpshooters. And so the regiment that remained on Little Round Top, was badly depleted. When the Texas or Alabama regiments attacked.
Yeah, I've read similar stories. The question was about the 16th at Little Round Top and what transpired to create the whole. Um, I was a little nervous about presenting at Gettysburg because everyone has an opinion about Norval Welch and what happened. Some claim outright cowardice and that he lost his nerve and pulled the men out. I mean, he had fought courageously with the regiment up to Gettysburg. I read, especially when I literally stumbled on the story from Byron Cutchin of the 20th Michigan, talking about what Welch said the night before the attack at People's Farm. I want to give him credit for what he did. And it's a kind of a controversial topic, and everyone has their own opinion about what happened. Some of you probably maybe don't agree with the way I portrayed him, but I have to give credit to someone that died so courageously like he did. So I'm not really answering your question. I'm not trying to dance around it, but there are a lot of different opinions about what happened to that group of the 16th and were they given direct orders, as Welch claimed they were, to withdraw. So yeah, again, I feel like I'm not really answering your question, but it's a tough one. Caleb?
Uh, so I have a really good question for that. So like regarding with Verdun sharpshooters.
Yeah.
The four companies that made up for Michigan.
Sure, yeah.
Does the federal government have Verdun flag?
I wish I knew. Caleb's question was, does the federal government possess the flags of the U.S. Infantry regiments like Berdan's sharpshooters? Ben, you may know more about this than I do. I've always wondered because people ask about the U.S. sharpshooter regiments and fact that four companies formed in Michigan, two of them right here in Lansing, and saw action right near the Devil's Den, near Little Round Top. I've never been able to track that down. It's probably a rabbit hole I need to jump into at some point to research. I'm assuming, yeah, I'm wondering. I'm assuming that those federal unit battle flags exist, but I don't know where the repository is for them. Ben's pulling up Google right now for me, so yeah.
Let's say that it's because everyone knows the 20th Maine on Little Rock.
Yeah.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that, like, during that charge, it was not just the 20th Maine.
Yeah.
It was U.S. sharpshooters as well,
Good.
and some of those guys I think were the company C of the first U.S., which is Michigan guy.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Because of course the
Yeah.
Michigan Sharpshooters Monument at Gettysburg is on Little Round Top.
Yeah, a gentleman I wrote about in my book on Lansing in the Civil War, James Baker, was with the Berdan sharpshooters and was actually suggested by his commanding officer that he receive the Medal of Honor for action, basically in stemming the tide, right there, close to where the 16th was fighting. He never got the medal. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, thank you, Jacob.
What happened to the flag of the fourth Michigan?
The Gettysburg flag. Yeah, so as I mentioned in the presentation, most firsthand accounts say that the force flag at the wheat field was torn to shreds and was lost in combat at the wheat field. I shouldn't venture into this. There's one thing that bothers me about the accounts of the fourth losing their battle flag at the wheat field. In the 1889 dedication ceremony of the Forest Monument near the wheat field, the historian of the fourth, Salisbury, talks about how they brought the colonel's body and the flag off the field. It's one account. It was written and the speech was given, 20 years, over 25, about 25 years after the action. But it's the only account that I've been able to find that claims the flag was brought off. Every other account says it was lost at the wheat field. So thank you so much. Oh, another question. So the Iron Brigade was originally composed of regiments from Wisconsin and Indiana, and they actually earned the name Iron Brigade at the Battle of South Mountain. You Civil War historians correct me if I'm not right on that. One of the Union generals supposedly was watching these regiments from this brigade go into combat, and he said to one of the other men next to him, he said, "Who are those men fighting like men made of iron?" And that's how they got the nickname, the Iron Brigade. And they also called them the Black Hat Brigade because they were the only brigade in the Union Army that wore the formal hardy hat into combat. It was a beautiful black hat with the brim pinned up at the side and an ostrich plume stuck out of it. They got another name by the Confederates after they had fought against the brigade, the damn Black Hats. They knew looking across a field if they saw Union soldiers all wearing the hardy hats that they were in for some serious fighting against seasoned veterans of the Iron Brigade. So hopefully it's a little bit better description.
I think it was McClellan. the gate.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, thank you again. Oh, one more. Sorry.
Read that, regarding the 24th.
Hmm.
That after the action on day one, that they were, put in reserve in an area which was supposed to be safe, which was Culp's Hill. And that they re-entered the fighting, I think on day three, at Culp's Hill and sustained even more casualties over there.
That part of it, I'm not super familiar with after the first day's fight. Do you agree, Ben? Is that,
they,
yeah,
Take it back to Culp's Hill. You can still walk their trenches,
yeah,
but they're on the side of Culp's Hill that faces town.
uh-huh,
So they would have been in reserve. They would have been in reserve.
yeah.
Digging in.
It didn't take casualties, though.
Not a significant number.
Yeah, that was my understanding too, but yeah, I appreciate
Never
that.
saw action.
Yeah.
On night of the first, night of the second, and on the.
Yeah, yeah. See, I told you at the start of this, I don't claim to be a Civil War historian,
They
so
have a small one right there.
yeah. Thank you. Hey, just one last shout out to Ed and Linda Carmen too, and the Walters are here. The Walters family have also adopted a battle flag in our collection, and I'm missing other groups that Ben Bever has been a part of have adopted flags in our collection. And who else am I missing? There are probably other people here that have supported the project, so we wouldn't be here without you. Thank